Tonight, somewhere between when you put down your phone and when you fall asleep, there's a good chance you'll feel it. A quiet ache, a sense that something is missing, that despite a day full of interactions, messages, meetings, and moments, something fundamentally human went unmet. Most people call this loneliness. Most people treat it like a flaw, an embarrassing symptom of a life not quite working right. Something to push past, suppress, or scroll away from. But what if loneliness isn't a flaw at all? What if it's one of the most sophisticated, precisely calibrated survival systems your body has ever developed? What if the ache you feel when you're alone, truly alone, is 50,000 years old, and it's working exactly as designed? The answer to that question changes everything about how loneliness feels, what it means, and what you should do when it arrives. To understand loneliness as a survival signal, you need to start somewhere most people never think to look. Hunger. Hunger is not a flaw. No one apologizes for being hungry. No one treats it as a personal failure. Hunger is a signal, elegant and ancient, designed to motivate a specific behavior. Finding food before a dangerous condition, starvation, becomes irreversible. The discomfort of hunger is precisely what makes it effective. If hunger felt pleasant, no one would bother eating until it was too late. Now here's the question almost no one thinks to ask. If the human body evolved such a precise, effective signal for the physical need of food, why would it not develop an equally precise signal for the social need of connection? For our species, social belonging wasn't a luxury. For most of human history, being excluded from your group was a death sentence, every bit as fatal as going without food. This is the argument at the heart of decades of research by a neuroscientist and psychologist named John Cacioppo, who spent much of his career at the University of Chicago studying what loneliness actually is and what it actually does to a human body. What he found wasn't what most people expect. Cacioppo's research showed that loneliness is not simply sadness about being alone. It's a distinct biological state, measurable in blood, in cortisol levels, in the functioning of the immune system, in the way the brain processes threat. Lonely people don't just feel different, they are biologically different in measurable, significant ways from people who feel socially connected, even when the external circumstances of their lives are nearly identical. This distinction is the key to everything. You can be surrounded by people and be profoundly lonely. You can be physically alone and feel no loneliness whatsoever. What loneliness tracks isn't physical isolation. It tracks something deeper, the perceived adequacy of your social bonds, the felt sense of whether the people around you would have your back if something went wrong. And that felt sense, that internal read on your social safety, is ancient in ways that almost no other human experience can match. Consider what life looked like for your ancestors 50,000 years ago. Not distant evolutionary ancestors, not proto-humans, but anatomically modern humans, people whose brains were identical to yours, navigating a world of small bands, numbering somewhere between 50 and 150 people. In that world, your social connections weren't simply pleasant to have. They were the single most important determinant of whether you survived. A lone human on the African savanna 50,000 years ago was almost certainly a dead human. No one could hunt large prey alone. No one could defend against predators alone. No one could survive injury, illness, or childbirth alone. Every survival need you have, food, safety, medical care, emotional stability, passed through your social group. Being expelled from that group, or simply drifting to its margins through conflict or neglect, was equivalent to a slow death sentence. An organism operating under those conditions needed a reliable early warning system, something that would trigger before social disconnection became fatal, something that would create sufficient discomfort to motivate immediate, urgent action to repair or rebuild social bonds. That system is loneliness. Cacioppo's evolutionary framework describes loneliness as a biological alarm signal, functionally identical to physical pain. Pain tells you that your body is being damaged and demands that you pay attention and change your behavior before the damage becomes permanent. Loneliness tells you that your social safety net is fraying and demands the same urgency, the same behavioral response. Repair your connections before the isolation becomes dangerous. This is why loneliness hurts the way it does. Not as a coincidence, not as an unfortunate side effect of being a sensitive creature, but as a precise design feature. A loneliness signal that felt neutral wouldn't motivate anyone to do anything about it. The ache, the restlessness, the hypervigilance that comes with sustained loneliness, all of it is the signal doing exactly what it was built to do. Here's where the research gets stranger and more revealing. Cacioppo and his colleagues found that chronic loneliness produces measurable changes in how the brain reads the social environment. Specifically, lonely people become more alert to social threat, more likely to read ambiguous social situations as hostile or rejecting, and more likely to interpret neutral expressions as unfriendly. In brain imaging studies, the threat detection systems in the brains of chronically lonely people fire more readily, more intensely, and more persistently than in socially connected people. At first glance, this looks like a malfunction, like loneliness is making people paranoid. But Cacioppo argued it's the opposite. This heightened social vigilance is exactly what the alarm system was designed to produce. In an ancestral environment, someone whose social bonds were fraying had every reason to be vigilant about threat. Social marginalization was dangerous. Misreading someone as hostile when they were neutral was a much safer error than misreading a genuine threat as neutral. The alarm system tilts perception toward threat because in the environment it evolved for, that tilt kept you alive. The problem is that this same tilt in the modern world is precisely what makes loneliness self-reinforcing. A lonely person, primed by hypervigilance to read social situations as threatening, is more likely to withdraw, to protect themselves, to interpret a friend's unanswered message as rejection rather than busyness. And that withdrawal, rational under the evolutionary logic of social threat, makes the loneliness worse, which increases the hypervigilance, which deepens the withdrawal. The alarm system designed to push you toward connection paradoxically begins, under sustained pressure, to push you away from it. Cacioppo called this the loneliness loop, and it's one of the more cruel features of a system that was never designed for the world we now live in. Because here's the problem that runs underneath all of this. The loneliness system evolved for a world of small, stable, face-to-face groups, where social bonds were built through physical proximity, shared labor, and daily contact. The signal it produces is calibrated to motivate behavior in that world, seeking out the people you depend on, staying close, repairing rifts before they widen. But in the modern world, that signal is firing in a social environment your ancestors would find completely unrecognizable. You can have 400 digital contacts and no one to call at 2 a.m. You can spend an entire day technically interacting with other humans through screens, meetings, and messages without a single interaction that meets the ancient standard the signal is actually checking for. Felt safety, reliable reciprocity, people who would show up if your survival were at stake. This is the central mismatch of modern loneliness. The signal is ancient, the environment is new, and the gap between what the signal is looking for and what the modern world offers is, for many people, enormous. A researcher named Robert Cacioppo, working with his father John, helped map another dimension of this: the physical toll that sustained loneliness extracts from the body. The data they compiled is stark. Chronically lonely people show elevated levels of the stress hormone cortisol. Chronically, they show increased inflammation markers, the kind associated with long-term disease risk. Their immune systems are measurably less effective at fighting viral infections. Their sleep is more fragmented, producing less of the deep restorative phases sleep is supposed to provide. The health effects of chronic loneliness, they calculated, are comparable in magnitude to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Let that land for a moment. Loneliness, when sustained, is as damaging to physical health as a pack and a half of cigarettes daily. Not because loneliness is a mental weakness, because the alarm system, running continuously without resolution, produces the same chronic physiological stress response that any sustained threat signal produces. Think of it like a smoke alarm that won't stop because there's no fire to put out. The alarm itself, screaming continuously, becomes the damage. This research should reframe the entire cultural conversation about loneliness. In most Western societies, loneliness is treated as a private, somewhat embarrassing condition, the result of personal failure to build a social life. But the evidence suggests it's a public health crisis with physical consequences every bit as serious as obesity, sedentary behavior, or chronic stress, and that it's driven not by personal failure, but by a profound mismatch between an ancient biological signal and the social conditions modern life provides. The loneliness epidemic that researchers have been documenting over the past several decades isn't a generation suddenly becoming bad at relationships. It's what happens when a precisely calibrated survival signal is placed in an environment it wasn't designed for and left running without the resolution it was built to receive. So what does the survival signal actually need to be resolved? This is where the research becomes both clarifying and humbling. Cacioppo's work suggested that what the loneliness signal is checking for isn't social activity in general. It's a specific quality of connection, something researchers sometimes call felt security, the subjective sense that there are people in your life who are reliably available, who care about your well-being, who you could depend on in a genuine crisis. Not the number of contacts, not the volume of interactions, the quality and perceived reliability of your deepest bonds. This helps explain why highly social people can nonetheless feel deeply lonely and why genuinely solitary people sometimes don't. What matters isn't how often you interact with others. It's whether those interactions produce the felt sense of being known, valued, and safe. Your ancestors didn't have to think about this deliberately. In a band of 50 to 150 people who depended on each other for daily survival, felt security was built into the fabric of every day. You ate together. You worked together. You slept near each other. You saw the same faces every day for years. The bonds that generated felt security were built and maintained continuously through sheer repetition and physical co-presence without any deliberate effort. The modern world provides almost none of these conditions automatically. You choose your social interactions from a vast menu of options. Those interactions are often brief, mediated by screens, and with people whose lives barely intersect with yours in practical terms. No one in your social circle is relying on you to help bring down a buffalo today. The visceral, daily interdependence that built deep bonds in your ancestors' world has largely been replaced by voluntary, intermittent, largely recreational contact. This doesn't mean deep bonds are impossible in the modern world. It means they require deliberate, sustained effort that in the ancestral environment wasn't necessary because the social structure provided them automatically. A researcher named Julianne Holt-Lunstad, who has produced some of the most comprehensive meta-analyses on social connection and health outcomes, found that having adequate social relationships is associated with a 50% increase in survival odds compared to social isolation across multiple major studies and hundreds of thousands of participants. 50%. The magnitude of that effect rivals or exceeds most medical interventions currently prescribed for the conditions that chronic loneliness helps cause. And yet, no doctor hands you a prescription for connection. No public health campaign treats isolation with the same urgency as smoking or inactivity, despite the comparable evidence. The survival signal is screaming, and the modern health system is largely still treating the alarm rather than the fire. What should you actually do with all of this? The first thing is to change how you relate to the signal itself. When loneliness arrives, The almost universal instinct is to treat it as a symptom of something wrong with you, to feel shame about it, suppress it, or try to drown it out with distraction. But if loneliness is a survival signal, then feeling it is not evidence of failure. It's evidence that the signal is working. It's evidence that you are, in the most fundamental biological sense, responding appropriately to a genuine need. Shame makes the signal worse. It adds a second layer of social threat on top of the first, the fear that others would judge you for feeling this way, which amplifies the hypervigilance and deepens the loop. The signal is telling you something specific. Your felt sense of social safety is below what your nervous system needs to function without chronic stress. That's actionable information. It's not a verdict on your worth or your likability. It's a reading on a specific biological gauge, and like hunger, it points toward a specific response. The second thing the research suggests is to focus ruthlessly on quality over quantity. Not more interactions, but deeper ones. Not a larger network, but more reliable bonds. Cacioppo's work consistently found that it takes only a handful of high-quality relationships characterized by felt security and reliable reciprocity, to bring the loneliness signal down to baseline. You don't need a tribe of 150 to quiet the alarm. You need a few people who genuinely know you, who you know would show up, and who experience the relationship as mutual. The difficulty, of course, is that building those bonds in modern life requires deliberately engineering the conditions that the ancestral world provided automatically. Regular, repeated face-to-face contact over time, genuine vulnerability, and reciprocal self-disclosure. Shared experiences that generate the sense of having been through something together. The slow accumulation of reliable moments that train your nervous system to register, these people are safe. There is no shortcut to this that the signal will accept. The loneliness alarm evolved to check for the real thing, and it has not been fooled by 10,000 years of civilization, let alone 30 years of the internet. The third thing worth sitting with is the most uncomfortable. You live in a society that has, largely by accident, dismantled many of the structural conditions that kept the loneliness signal quiet for most of human history. Not through malice, not through anyone's specific failure, but through the slow accumulation of choices that prioritized individual freedom, geographic mobility, economic efficiency, and digital convenience over the messy, time-consuming, geographically constrained conditions in which deep human bonds actually form. Your ancestors didn't have to choose connection. It was the water they swam in. You do have to choose it, actively, repeatedly, against the grain of a world that makes isolation effortless and depth uncomfortable. The loneliness signal has been trying to tell you this for your entire life. Not because something is wrong with you, because something is missing from the environment you were placed in. And the signal, 50,000 years old and still perfectly calibrated, knows the difference. So tonight, when that quiet ache arrives between the phone going down and the eyes going closed, try something different. Instead of pushing it away or feeling ashamed of it or reaching for a distraction, pause for just a moment. Recognize it for what it is, not a flaw, not a failure, a signal, ancient, intelligent, precise, one that your body inherited from 50,000 years of ancestors who survived because they listened to it, because they took it seriously, because they turned toward each other when it fired. The alarm is still working. It's just waiting for you to hear it and do what your ancestors always did when they felt it. Turn toward the people who matter. Not tomorrow, now. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. If you find this video interesting, please consider subscribing for more content like this.